Thank you. Yep. I'm going to put my water down here. Make the stage look a bit messy, I'm afraid. Wow. First of all, congratulations for managing to get all of these people in, despite the trains, and Stephen and team for getting people online. It's hugely impressive, really excited, and what a room. So, hello, Happy New Year, and thank you very much for having us today. For those of you who don't know, this year, next year is GroupM's biannual forecasting report, where we look at predictions and trends for the new year. It is put together by multiple teams in our business, our investment teams, our marketing teams, our business intelligence teams, and they look at an enormous amount of data to pull this report together. Now, it can be quite daunting to come into a room and talk about the year ahead after the year we've had behind. And I really hoped when I was here today that I would be in a room full of optimism, and it certainly feels like that by you were all coming, especially battling through the trains. So looking back at the report that we issued in 2021, if I'd have been stood here back then, I would have said we'd had a phenomenal year before. As you know, we estimated global growth was about 22.5%. And we were expecting things to slow down, but actually they were going much faster than we expected to. And we predicted that for 2022, we would see 9.7% growth. Now, as you all know, in any given year, that budgets will rise or drop or be maintained, and that's certainly true for a year of economic uncertainty. So when we looked at this report again, back in June, we knew there'd be some changes, and we did actually downgrade our forecast to 8.4. And I don't need to remind you, but then 22 started to play out, and inflation levels went up to record highs that we hadn't seen in decades. We saw Brexit start to play out, the supply chain squeeze. We saw more jobs as a result of that. We saw 3 prime ministers, a disaster of a budget. The war in Ukraine has gone on longer than we probably anticipated, and we had one new king. And energy prices just kept rising. And actually, there was a study done by University of York towards the back end of last year that said, at the beginning of this year, 2/3 of the country could be in fuel poverty. And that's going to be really difficult for us to pay those bills when the average person's salary is 1 month, savings pot is 1 month's salary. So phenomenal, I think we can all appreciate how difficult it's going to be. So obviously that posed a lot of challenges, that poses a lot of challenges for us, but what we're not seeing yet is the universal downturn that we saw in perhaps other previous recessions. So what does that mean for us in the room? Well, we've perhaps never been more in the spotlight than we have in the past few months, the past 6 months. And what we hope is that decelerating inflation, obviously, Rishi made some promises yesterday, we'll see that consumer spending is sustained, and therefore we avoid an advertising recession. And held up in that light, I'm pleased to say, given I'm standing here today, that the message is not altogether negative, and as Greg mentioned, there's a level of optimism. So what we now believe phenomenal growth for 2022 finished at 6.5%, and that's excluding US political advertising out to what we call underlying growth. If we exclude China, now China obviously due to the size of the market makes a big difference on the weighting of the numbers, we're going to see 8.1% growth at the end of 22. Looking forward to 2023, we estimate that it's going to be 5.9% global growth, which is really much more positive perhaps than any of us expected, particularly in the context, as we were talking about, of the last 2 very unique and unusual years. If If we go a bit deeper into our top 10 markets, so these markets here are our largest markets that we have at GroupM. We track 62, and actually half of the 62 markets downgraded their forecast from June. As I said, we released in June and then again in December, half downgraded. A third actually increased their forecast from the June to December, and there were about 10 that maintained. And you can see here, you know, the standout market really is India. It's going to have double-digit growth, both 22 and 23. And what we thought prior to the report coming out, actually, the UK in terms of size of market might edge into that third position, but due to all the economic factors that we've spoken about, we have maintained our fourth position. So looking at channel, how does that look? Well, in these figures, you will see that out-of-home is a star performer according to our numbers, and we estimate that it will grow in 22, or the final growth will be 18.1%. We know that this is still very much a story of recovery, and actually the levels for out-of-home spend will go kind of full back to normal, if you like, in 2024. You'll also notice that we're excluding China in this, and that's because China actually, due to their lockdown policies, saw a 30% decline in their out-of-home this year. And they used to be the world's largest out-of-home market, and they've now ceded that position. So what does that mean here at home? Well, as I said, it's been a roller coaster of a summer and an autumn. But we have regained some of our footing, with the pound increasing against the dollar from its very low in September, and also the full year 22 GDP growth estimated to be 3.5% according to PwC. So our forecast for 22, we forecasted 8.9%, moving, or rather decelerating to 5% in the coming year in 23. So what does that mean in terms of trends within media channels? Well, retail media is one of the fastest growing segments in the advertising industry today, and we now estimate it globally to be 110.7 billion in terms of revenue, which is absolutely phenomenal. That's been reforecast as well. When we first thought we looked at it in June, it was 101, so the growth is phenomenal. In the UK, we estimate it to grow to about 6.5 billion by 2027, which I know feels like a long way away. And it's grown 28% in the last year. You can see some of that growth. That's obviously benefited somewhat by our shopping habits shifting from offline to online, but we don't think that's the only source of growth. Where we see other growth is coming from is overseas merchants, notably China, and also non-retail endemic brands moving in to use retail media. And what about TV? So I don't know about you, but I have spent the past 2, possibly 4, if you include the World Cup, watching a lot of telly, pretty much not doing anything else. And it certainly continues its recovery since the pandemic. It is, albeit slowly, more slowly than 22. And what we see now, what we hope to see, is growth of 1.7% globally. Over the next 5 years, we expect that to remain between 1% and 3%. And in the UK, we're expecting kind of around that 1.5% as well. TV still accounts for 12% of the UK market, and you can see here a lot of the spend is now going into CTV and what we are in connected TV. And what we're expecting is those shifts to come from the initial linear TV budgets. Out of home, as I said, it is very much the superstar within our numbers. You can see it's the success story. As I said, about 18.1% globally, but here in the UK for 22, we saw 30% growth, which is astonishing. Digital out of home, obviously, whilst making up a smaller share of inventory, we're now seeing actually makes up between 30 and 40% of revenue at some of our out-of-home companies. The other success story here that isn't on this slide, but comes from us emerging from our homes, of course, is cinema. And what we saw was 158% growth again within last year, which is phenomenal. And we're still seeing growth for cinema, estimated about 2.2% for 23. So it's really encouraging that we're all finding those moments again. In terms of audio, it's projected to grow 3.8% globally, and as of the end of 22, and then 1.3% in 23. Digital audio now makes up about a quarter of that, and obviously we see that growing double digits, both in final numbers for 22 and in 23. Print, so after a brief respite in 2021, we are seeing that decline in print, but as we know, as with TV, as with audio, we are now turning to those online platforms to consume our news, to consume our content. And I think, certainly my feeling about print is there were so many studies that happened during the pandemic that proves that the news that we got, be it online, be it in print, was fundamental, not only in people receiving knowledge, but also in the success of the vaccination rollout. And I think what's really encouraging is that the entire industry now is recognizing its importance, not only for us in the industry, but also for society, especially in the era of misinformation. Put my teeth back in. And finally, digital advertising. Well, we are expecting that to grow double digits again this year. And in the UK, a final number we predicted would be 10.7%. Now, the thing to remember there is that came off the back of the 21 growth being 31.5%, which is obviously phenomenal and not a number that we would expect to see again. Now what we expect is for it to make up 67% of all media. And when I say 67%, what I'm including there is all of those advertisers that spend all of their budget online. So it's a global average rather than obviously representative of some of our larger brands spend, which we're still seeing between 40 and 50 on telly, 40 and 50 on digital, and then all of those, the rest of the media on top of that. So in the words of Ian Jury, there are reasons to be cheerful, and we have reasons to be optimistic, albeit cautiously. Now, there are three reasons. We have downgraded some of our media channels, yes, absolutely, but it's not consistent in market and it's not consistent by media. And what that tells us is actually, therefore, this may be short term. In the next few years, we will see change in that and things will start to regain. Certain media channels will start to regain, certainly across the markets. So that's massive reason to be positive. For the most part, our brands, our clients, our large global clients have been telling us, yes, they do have some concern, a lot of concern over the cost of living crisis, over the economy. However, because they've been able to pass on some of those additional costs that they've taken on, sales revenue has kind of maintained and it's relatively resilient, and the sales are still up. Well, as I said in the kind of beginning, we're going to have to be really choiceful with what we spend next year as people, as humans, and therefore that may further impact some of the budgets that we are seeing. What we have learned, though, from previous pandemics is those brands that adapt very quickly to the new consumer behavior that comes with recessions and with pandemics are the ones that are successful. Amazon is a very good example of this. Back in 2009, they had record sales through the Kindle, which is obviously when we all started moving from reading books, still have a lot of those, to reading digitally. So those who adapt succeed. And finally, new business creation. So broadly, people are still able to find jobs, and what we've seen is there is still a significant amount of new business creation, and for some of those, they are advertising at levels that actually fills the gap that where we've seen other advertisers drop their budgets. We also believe that they are a third biggest driver of revenue, and in the European Union, we've seen them be very resilient and grow over the past 3 years. So that was a lot of data and a lot of insights in a very short amount of time. So where do I finish with that? Well, firstly, I think we are a resilient, forward-thinking industry, and we find ways to adapt, and that's a real positive way for us to look at this. Secondly, I think we should remember that whilst, and Greg made this point, whilst levels of growth have slowed, we're still in growth, and that's good. That's really positive. And for me, personally, in an industry and a room full of innovators, creatives, problem solvers, I very much remain an optimist. Thank you.